And the reason why I want to spend a minute here is that it's something which is not always very well understood, and you need to understand what happens. Authentication, you have several options. One option is what we call meraki authentication. In that scheme, the authentication is going to be done on the cloud. So that makes that if your phone wants to associate to the access points, and if the access point SSID is configured to use the meraki authentication with a cloud, then the request, your authentication server, is going to be the dashboard. So from your network, your client EPOL request is going to be encapsulated and sent to the cloud, where the meraki radius is going to take care of it. So in that case, there is traffic going from your network to the cloud. More than control traffic, right? Authentication traffic is going across to the cloud. That's for the authentication, but of course, once the authentication completes, the data traffic itself from your client is not going to the cloud anymore. That is still going to be sent locally to your network, into your switch, and maybe to the internet if you need to access the internet, but that is not going to the cloud anymore. The only side that goes to the cloud is the authentication side. So that's the phase where your traffic may be crossing the cloud to get to the dashboard. Once authentication completes, we don't use the cloud anymore. That's done, that's local switching. But there is another option which is called MyRadius authentication. When you use that one, well then you still use a radius, but you're going to define your radius in your enterprise. So don't get confused between the meraki authentication and the MyRadius authentication, because in the MyRadius authentication, you don't need the cloud. So your authentication traffic is not going across to the cloud. What goes to the cloud is the control traffic about your configuration to the access points, but data, authentication traffic from your users, that's going to go through the access point, maybe through a switch, and then to whatever IP address you define for your radius server. So it's going to stay into your network or go to wherever the radius server is. But the cloud doesn't have anything to do with this authentication phase if you define the authentication to be that way, MyRadius. So let's look at how we do it. I am back here on my cloud configuration for the SSID, and this is where you're going to decide where the authentication should take place. You can check WPA-V2 Enterprise with meraki authentication, and if you do so, remember, that's when the authentication is going to go through the network to the cloud, and meraki is going to take care of the authentication. If you do so, then you have to create users. And this is done in the network-wide section. Let me go there for a minute. And you see I didn't save my configuration, so it's not going to be taken there, but it doesn't matter. Here you have all the users that you want to create in that cloud. If you want to have new users, you just go add new user, give it a description, and the username for that user is always going to be the email address. You can create the password yourself or generate a random password. And because the username is the email address, when you click Create User, what is going to happen is that the cloud is going to send an email to that user saying, you've been registered to my network, and by the way, this is your password. This is looking like a sort of guest or web authentication type of thing, but you are going to use it everywhere you need it, including when you create SSIDs and you configure them. So if I go back to my CCNA SSID, and if I say I'm going to use WPA2 Enterprise with meraki authentication, I'm going to rely on this list and these users I created to create new users and have this radius authentication of the users. So when they will be using 802.1x to connect to my network, their username is going to be that email address, and the password is going to be whatever password the system generated for them. So that is if you use the meraki authentication. If you use the MyRadius server instead, then you have to go down and you have a new section that appears that's named Radius Servers. And there you have to click Add a Server and enter your own server IP address, which is going to be again in your network. It's not going to be in the cloud. So for example, 172.29.129.157 is my radius. The port my radius uses is, as usual, 1812. And I'm going to define a shared secret, which is going to be Cisco, for example. And voila, my radius is created. I can click Save Changes. A great thing about this feature is that there is a test button, which means that if you're not sure that your radius is properly configured, you can always click the test button and it's going to try to emulate a client and connect to your Redis. Let me do it, especially as this is a non-existent Redis server. So let's see what happens when I click test. Well, what happens is that it's going to ask me for username and password to test. So let me try my usual username Cisco and my password Cisco. And when you click begin test, the system is going to connect to each access point, and from this access point is going to try to connect to the Redis server, see if it can be reached and if the authentication works. And this is interesting because you can see each access point being tried, and of course in my case it's going to fail. And it is interesting because you may have some issues that may be related to the fact that the Redis doesn't exist, which is my case. But you may also have some cases where some APs do not have IP reachability to the Redis server because of routing issues. So in that case, you may see some APs failing and some APs succeeding. And when you click the detail here, you're going to be able to see which one failed and which one succeeded, and then you'll be able to focus your attention to the ones that fail and try to figure out what routing issue may be preventing them from reaching the Redis server. All right, so this is the basic of creating an SSID on the cloud management interface.